In the late 16th century, a group of 115 English settlers vanished without a trace. Their story begins on the shores of Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. This is America's oldest unsolved mystery, a tale of ambition, survival, and a chilling disappearance that has baffled historians for centuries. The Roanoke Colony, often referred to as the Lost Colony, represents one of the most enduring enigmas in American history. What happened to these settlers? Were they victims of nature, conflict, or something far more mysterious? The answers remain buried in the sands of time. The Roanoke Colony was England's first attempt at establishing a permanent settlement in the New World. Funded by Sir Walter Raleigh and sanctioned by Queen Elizabeth I, the colony was meant to be a beacon of English power and prosperity. In the 1580s, England was eager to compete with Spain, which had already established a formidable presence in the Americas. Roanoke Island was chosen for its strategic location, offering access to both the Atlantic Ocean and inland waterways. The settlers arrived with dreams of building a new life, but the harsh realities of the New World would soon test their resolve. In 1590, Governor John White returned to Roanoke after a 3-year absence. He had left the colony in 1587 to secure supplies from England, but his return was delayed by war and storms. When he finally arrived, he found the settlement abandoned. The houses had been dismantled, and the fort was eerily empty. The only clue? The word Croatoan, carved into a wooden post. This single word has fueled centuries of speculation. Was it a message, a warning, or a desperate plea for help? The mystery deepened when White discovered that the letters CRO had been carved into a nearby tree. But with no bodies, no signs of struggle, and no clear explanation, the fate of the settlers remained shrouded in uncertainty. Where did the settlers go? Theories abound, each more intriguing than the last. Some believe they were massacred by hostile Native American tribes, while others suggest they integrated with the Croatoan people, a local tribe known for its relative friendliness. Could the settlers have sought refuge with the Croatoans, adopting their way of life to survive? Another theory points to starvation and harsh winters, suggesting that the colonists simply perished from lack of resources. Yet, the absence of human remains makes this theory difficult to prove. More dramatic explanations include a Spanish conspiracy, as Spain sought to eliminate English competition in the New World. And then there are the supernatural theories, stories of curses, alien abductions, and even time travel. The truth, however, remains elusive. Even today, archaeologists and historians search for clues. Excavations on Roanoke Island have uncovered artifacts, including pottery shards, tools, and European coins, but none provide definitive answers. Modern technology, such as ground-penetrating radar and DNA analysis, has renewed hope for solving the mystery. Yet, the truth remains just out of reach. The Roanoke Colony is more than a historical footnote. It's a haunting reminder of the fragility of human ambition and the secrets buried by time. Join us as we unravel the story of Roanoke, a mystery that continues to captivate and terrify. What really happened to the lost colony? And will we ever uncover the truth? The answers may lie hidden in the shadows of history, waiting to be discovered. In the late 16th century, England was a nation on the rise. Under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, the country was emerging as a global power, eager to rival Spain's dominance in the New World. The Queen and her advisors dreamed of establishing colonies in the Americas, not only to expand England's influence, but also to secure wealth, resources, and a foothold in the race for global supremacy. This vision of colonization was ambitious, daring, and fraught with risk. But for England, the rewards far outweighed the dangers. Spain had already established a vast empire in the Americas, fueled by the riches of gold and silver from places like Mexico and Peru. England, lagging behind, saw an opportunity to carve out its own piece of the New World. The idea was simple: establish colonies that could serve as bases for trade, military outposts, and sources of raw materials. But England's ambitions went beyond mere economics. Colonization was also a way to spread Protestantism and counter the Catholic influence of Spain. The stage was set for a bold experiment, one that would begin with the Roanoke Colony. The man tasked with turning this vision into reality was Sir Walter Raleigh, a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I. Raleigh was a charismatic and ambitious figure, known for his daring exploits and unwavering loyalty to the crown. In 1584, he received a royal charter to explore and colonize the New World. Raleigh's plan was to establish a settlement that could serve as a launching point for further exploration and a symbol of England's growing power. But this was no easy task. The journey across the Atlantic was perilous, and the New World was an unforgiving frontier, filled with unknown dangers. The first Roanoke expedition set sail in 1584, led by explorers Philip Amatus and Arthur Barlow. Their mission was to scout the coast of present-day North Carolina and identify a suitable location for a colony. What they found was Roanoke Island, a place of stunning natural beauty, with fertile soil, abundant wildlife, and friendly Native American tribes. Barlow described it as a land of plenty, a paradise waiting to be claimed. But the reality of colonization would prove far more complex. The settlers who followed would face harsh conditions, hostile encounters, and the constant threat of failure. The Native Americans who inhabited the region, including the Croatoan and Secondin tribes, initially welcomed the English settlers. They saw an opportunity for trade and alliance, but tension soon arose, fueled by cultural misunderstandings and the settlers' growing demands for food and resources. The fragile peace began to unravel, setting the stage for conflict. For England, the dream of colonization was becoming a nightmare. Yet, despite the challenges, the vision persisted. The Roanoke Colony was just a beginning, a bold experiment that would shape the course of history. England's dream of colonization was a story of ambition, courage, and hubris. It was a vision that would lead to triumph and tragedy, success and failure. And at the heart of it all was Roanoke, a colony that would vanish into the mists of history, leaving behind a mystery that endures to this day. Sir Walter Raleigh was a man of vision, ambition, and daring, a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I. He was a soldier, explorer, and courtier who dreamed of expanding England's influence across the globe. Raleigh's grand plan was to establish a permanent English colony in the New World, a bold endeavor that would secure his legacy and strengthen England's position as a global power. But this was no simple task. The New World was a land of mystery, danger, and untold challenges. Raleigh's vision would require courage, resources, and unwavering determination. In 1584, Raleigh received a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I, granting him the right to explore and colonize the New World. His goal was to establish a settlement that could serve as a base for trade, a military outpost, and a symbol of England's growing power. Raleigh's plan was ambitious. He envisioned a colony that would not only thrive economically but also serve as a haven for English Protestants, countering the Catholic influence of Spain. The first step was to send an expedition to scout the coast of present-day North Carolina and identify a suitable location for the colony. The first Roanoke expedition, led by Philip Amatus and Arthur Barlow, set sail in 1584. Their mission was to explore the coastline, establish contact with Native American tribes, and find a location for the colony. After a long and perilous journey, they arrived at Roanoke Island, a place of stunning natural beauty. Barlow described it as a land of plenty, with fertile soil, abundant wildlife, and friendly natives. The explorers returned to England with glowing reports, fueling Raleigh's enthusiasm and securing further support for his grand plan. In 1585, Raleigh launched a second expedition, this time with the goal of establishing a permanent settlement. Led by Sir Richard Grenville, the expedition included over 100 men, including soldiers, craftsmen, and scientists. They arrived at Roanoke Island and began building the colony, but challenges quickly arose. The settlers struggled to grow crops, and tensions with the local Native American tribes escalated. Despite these difficulties, Raleigh remained committed to his vision. He believed that the colony could succeed with proper leadership and support. Raleigh's grand plan was not just about colonization. It was also about diplomacy. He hoped to establish alliances with the Native American tribes, creating a network of trade and mutual support. However, cultural misunderstandings and the settlers' growing demand for resources strained these relationships. The fragile peace began to unravel, and the colony faced increasing hostility. Raleigh's dream of a thriving English settlement was slipping away, but he refused to give up. He continued to invest in the colony, sending more settlers and supplies, determined to see his vision realized. Sir Walter Raleigh's grand plan was a story of ambition, courage, and perseverance. It was a vision that would shape the course of history, paving the way for future English colonies in the New World. But it was also a story of hardship and tragedy, as the Roanoke Colony faced insurmountable challenges. Raleigh's dream would ultimately end in mystery, leaving behind a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire. In 1584, Sir Walter Raleigh launched the first Roanoke expedition, a daring mission to explore the New World and lay the groundwork for England's first colony. Led by Captains Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, the expedition set sail with high hopes and grand ambitions. Their goal was to scout the coast of present-day North Carolina, establish contact with Native American tribes, and identify a suitable location for a permanent settlement. This journey marked the beginning of England's colonial ambitions in the Americas, a venture filled with promise, peril, and the unknown. The voyage across the Atlantic was long and treacherous. The crew faced storms, rough seas, and the constant threat of Spanish ships, which patrolled the waters to protect their own colonial interests. After weeks at sea, the expedition finally reached the outer banks of present-day North Carolina. The explorers were struck by the beauty of the land, a lush, green coastline teeming with wildlife and natural resources. They named the region Virginia, in honor of Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. This was the first step in England's bid to establish a foothold in the New World. The expedition made landfall on Roanoke Island, a narrow strip of land nestled between the mainland and the Atlantic Ocean. The island was an ideal location for a colony, with its fertile soil, abundant fish, and access to fresh water. Amadas and Barlow spent several weeks exploring the area, mapping the coastline and documenting the natural resources. They also made contact with the local Native American tribes, including the Secedon and Croatoan. The explorers were warmly welcomed by the natives, who saw an opportunity for trade and alliance. The relationship between the explorers and the Native Americans was initially friendly. The Secedon chief, Wingina, hosted the Englishmen and introduced them to his people. The explorers were fascinated by the natives' way of life, from their farming techniques to their intricate social structures. In return, the English offered gifts of metal tools, cloth, and other European goods. This exchange marked the beginning of a fragile alliance, but it was also a source of tension. The explorers' growing demands for food and resources began to strain the relationship, foreshadowing the conflicts that would later plague the colony. After several weeks on Roanoke Island, Amadas and Barlow decided to return to England. They brought with them two Native Americans, Manteo and Wanchese, who would serve as cultural ambassadors and help Raleigh plan the next expedition. The explorers also carried glowing reports of the land, describing it as a paradise ripe for colonization. These reports fueled Raleigh's enthusiasm and secured further support for his grand plan. But the challenges of colonization were far greater than anyone anticipated. The first Roanoke expedition had laid the groundwork for a bold experiment, but the true test was yet to come. The first Roanoke expedition was a story of discovery, ambition, and hope. It marked the beginning of England's colonial ambitions in the New World and set the stage for the establishment of the Roanoke Colony. But it was also a story of challenges and uncertainties, as the explorers encountered a land that was both beautiful and unforgiving. The stage was set for a bold experiment, one that would end in mystery and leave behind a legacy that continues to captivate the world. In 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh launched the second Roanoke expedition, this time with the goal of establishing a permanent settlement. Led by Sir Richard Grenville, the expedition included over 100 men, soldiers, craftsmen, scientists, and adventurers, all eager to build a new life in the New World. The settlers arrived at Roanoke Island with high hopes, but they soon discovered that the challenges of colonization were far greater than anyone had anticipated. This was the beginning of England's first attempt at a permanent colony in the Americas, a venture that would test the limits of human endurance and resilience. The first task of the settlers was to build a fortified settlement. They constructed simple wooden houses, a storehouse for supplies, and a small fort to protect against potential attacks. The work was grueling, and the settlers faced numerous obstacles, from harsh weather to unfamiliar terrain. Despite these challenges, they managed to establish a functioning colony within a few months. But the settlers' survival depended on more than just shelter. They needed food, water, and allies. The relationship with the local Native American tribes would prove to be both a lifeline and a source of conflict. Initially, the settlers relied on the Secondin tribe for food and guidance. The Secondin chief, Wingina, had welcomed the English during the first expedition, and the settlers hoped to maintain this alliance. However, tension soon arose. The settlers' growing demand for food and resources strained the relationship, and cultural misunderstandings further complicated matters. The English viewed the natives as potential allies and trading partners, but they also saw them as obstacles to their own ambitions. This fragile balance of power would soon unravel, leading to conflict and mistrust. One of the settlers' greatest challenges was agriculture. The fertile soil of Roanoke Island had initially seemed promising, but the settlers lacked the knowledge and experience to grow crops in the new world. Their attempts at farming were largely unsuccessful, and they quickly exhausted their supplies of food from England. Desperate for sustenance, the settlers turned to the Secondin, demanding more food than the tribe could reasonably provide. This led to resentment and hostility, further straining the already fragile relationship. The settlers were caught in a vicious cycle, unable to grow their own food and increasingly dependent on the natives for survival. As tensions escalated, violence erupted. The settlers, fearing for their safety, launched a preemptive strike against the Secondin, killing several tribespeople, including Chief Wingina. This act of aggression shattered any hope of reconciliation and turned the natives against the English. The settlers found themselves isolated, surrounded by hostile tribes and struggling to survive. By 1586, the situation had become dire. The colony was on the brink of collapse, and the settlers were desperate for rescue. In the summer of 1586, Sir Francis Drake arrived at Roanoke Island during his voyage around the Americas. Seeing the desperate state of the colony, he offered to take the settlers back to England. Faced with starvation and constant threat, the settlers agreed. The first attempt at establishing a permanent colony had ended in failure. But this was not the end of the Roanoke story. Sir Walter Raleigh remained determined to see his vision realized, and within a year, a new group of settlers would arrive on Roanoke Island, setting the stage for one of history's greatest mysteries. The relationship between the English settlers and the Native American tribes was fraught with tension from the very beginning. What started as a cautious alliance quickly devolved into mistrust and hostility. The settlers, desperate for food and resources, placed increasing demands on the local tribes, while cultural misunderstandings and conflicting worldviews deepened the divide. This fragile relationship would soon erupt into violence, setting the stage for the colony's eventual collapse. When the English first arrived on Roanoke Island, they relied heavily on the Secondin tribe for survival. The Secondin, led by Chief Wingina, initially welcomed the settlers, seeing an opportunity for trade and alliance. The English brought with them metal tools, cloth, and other European goods, which the natives valued. However, the settlers' dependence on the Secondin for food quickly became a source of tension. The tribe's resources were limited, and they could not sustain the growing demands of the colony. This imbalance created resentment on both sides, as the settlers grew frustrated and the Secondin felt exploited. Cultural misunderstandings further complicated the relationship. The English viewed the land as a resource to be claimed and cultivated, while the Secondin saw it as a shared space that required careful stewardship. The settlers' attempts to impose their own agricultural practices often clashed with the natives' traditional methods, leading to disputes over land use. Additionally, the English's sense of superiority and their dismissive attitude toward native customs created a growing sense of alienation. What began as a partnership of convenience was rapidly unraveling. By 1586, tensions had reached a breaking point. The settlers, fearing for their safety and desperate for food, decided to take drastic action. They launched a preemptive strike against the Secondin, killing several tribespeople, including Chief Wingina. This act of violence was intended to assert dominance and secure resources, but had the opposite effect. The attack shattered any remaining trust between the settlers and the natives, turning the Secondin and their allies into enemies. The colony was now surrounded by hostile tribes, and the settlers found themselves in precarious position. The aftermath of the attack was devastating. The settlers, already struggling with food shortages and harsh living conditions, now faced a constant threat of retaliation. They were forced to remain within the confines of their fort, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. The colony's survival depended on supplies from England, but these were slow to arrive and often insufficient. The settlers' isolation and vulnerability became increasingly apparent and morale plummeted. By the time Sir Francis Drake arrived in the summer of 1586, the colony was on the brink of collapse. The failure of the first Roanoke colony was a stark reminder of the challenges of colonization. The settlers' inability to coexist with the native population, combined with their reliance on external support, proved to be their undoing. But this was not the end of the Roanoke story. Sir Walter Raleigh remained determined to establish a permanent English presence in the New World, and within a year, a new group of settlers would arrive on Roanoke Island. Their fate, however, would be even more mysterious and enigmatic than that of their predecessors. In 1587, Sir Walter Raleigh made a second attempt to establish a colony on Roanoke Island. This time, the expedition was led by Governor John White, an experienced artist and cartographer who had accompanied the previous expedition. Unlike the first group of settlers, who were primarily soldiers and adventurers, this new group included families, men, women, and children who hoped to build a permanent home in the New World. Among them was White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, who was pregnant with his granddaughter, Virginia Dare. This second colony represented a bold new chapter in England's colonial ambitions, but would soon face challenges far greater than anyone could have imagined. The journey to Roanoke Island was fraught with difficulties. The settlers faced storms, rough seas, and the constant threat of Spanish ships. When they finally arrived, they found the fort abandoned and overgrown. The remnants of the first colony served as a grim reminder of the challenges ahead. Despite this, the settlers began rebuilding the settlement, determined to succeed where their predecessors had failed. Governor White worked tirelessly to establish order, but tensions with the local Native American tribes remained a constant concern. The settlers' survival depended on their ability to coexist with the natives, but this fragile peace would soon be tested. The relationship between the settlers and the Native Americans was strained from the start. The Secedon and other tribes remembered the violence of the previous colony and were wary of the new arrivals. Governor White attempted to negotiate with the tribes, but cultural misunderstandings and mistrust made cooperation difficult. The settlers' reliance on the natives for food and resources created further tension, as the tribes were unwilling to provide more than they could spare. This delicate balance of power would soon unravel, leaving the colony vulnerable and isolated. Agriculture proved to be one of the settlers' greatest challenges. The fertile soil of Roanoke Island was difficult to cultivate without the proper knowledge and tools. The settlers' attempts to grow crops were largely unsuccessful, and they quickly exhausted their supplies of food from England. Desperate for sustenance, they turned to the natives, but the tribes were reluctant to share their limited resources. The settlers found themselves caught in a vicious cycle, unable to grow their own food and increasingly dependent on the natives for survival. This precarious situation would soon come to a head. By the summer of 1587, the colony was in dire need of supplies. Governor White made the difficult decision to return to England to secure more resources. He left behind his daughter, Eleanor, and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare, promising to return as soon as possible. The settlers watched as White's ship sailed away, unaware that this would be the last time they would see him. The fate of the colony now rested on White's ability to secure support and return quickly. But events beyond his control would delay his return, leaving the settlers to face an uncertain future. Governor John White's departure marked a turning point for the Roanoke colony. The settlers were left to fend for themselves in a harsh and unforgiving land, surrounded by hostile tribes and dwindling resources. Their survival depended on their resilience and resourcefulness, but the challenges they faced were immense. As White's ship disappeared over the horizon, the settlers could not have known that their story would become one of history's greatest mysteries, a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. On August 18th, 1587, a momentous event took place on Roanoke Island, the birth of Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. Her arrival was a symbol of hope and renewal for the struggling colony. Virginia was a granddaughter of Governor John White and the daughter of Eleanor and Ananias Dare, two of the colony's most prominent settlers. Her birth marked a new chapter in the Roanoke story, one that would forever link her name to the mystery of the lost colony. Virginia's birth was celebrated by the entire colony, a rare moment of joy in an otherwise difficult time. The settlers saw her as a sign that their efforts to build a new life in the new world were not in vain. She represented the future, a future filled with promise and possibility. But this optimism was short-lived. The colony's struggles with food shortages, hostile natives, and harsh living conditions continued to weigh heavily on the settlers. Virginia's birth was a bright spot in an otherwise bleak reality, but it could not change the fact that the colony was teetering on the edge of survival. Despite the challenges, the settlers did their best to create a sense of community. They held gatherings, shared stories, and celebrated milestones like Virginia's birth. These moments of unity helped to strengthen their resolve, but they could not erase the underlying tensions that threatened to tear the colony apart. The settlers' dependence on the native for food and resources created a constant source of conflict, and their inability to grow their own crops left them vulnerable. Virginia's birth was a reminder of what they were fighting for, but it also highlighted the fragility of their situation. Governor John White was deeply attached to his granddaughter, and her birth made his decision to return to England even more difficult. He knew that the colony's survival depended on his ability to secure supplies and reinforcements, but leaving his family behind was a heavy burden to bear. As he prepared to depart, White made a solemn promise to return as soon as possible. He could not have known that his journey would be delayed by events beyond his control, leaving the settlers to face an uncertain future without him. Virginia Dare's birth was a moment of hope in a time of great uncertainty. She represented the promise of a new beginning, but her story would soon become intertwined with one of history's greatest mysteries. As Governor White's ship disappeared over the horizon, the settlers were left to wonder what the future held. Would help arrive in time? Or would they be forced to confront the challenges of a new world on their own? The answers to these questions will remain elusive, leaving Virginia's fate and the fate of the entire colony shrouded in mystery. Virginia Dare's birth was a symbol of hope and resilience, but was also a reminder of the fragility of human ambition. Her story is a testament to the courage and determination of the Roanoke settlers, but it is also a cautionary tale about the challenges of colonization. As we delve deeper into the mystery of the lost colony, we are left to wonder, what became of Virginia Dare and the other settlers? Their story remains one of history's greatest enigmas, a mystery that continues to captivate and inspire. In the summer of 1587, Governor John White made a fateful decision that would forever alter the course of the Roanoke Colony. Faced with dwindling supplies and growing desperation, White chose to return to England to secure more resources for the struggling settlement. It was a difficult choice, one that required him to leave behind his daughter, Eleanor, and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare. White promised to return as soon as possible, but events beyond his control would delay his journey, leaving the settlers to face an uncertain future. The settlers watched as White's ship disappeared over the horizon, their hopes and fears intertwined. They knew that their survival depended on his ability to secure supplies and reinforcements, but they also understood the risks involved. The journey across the Atlantic was perilous, and the political situation in England was unpredictable. White's departure marked a turning point for the colony, one that would test the settlers' resilience and resourcefulness in ways they could not have imagined. White's journey back to England was fraught with challenges. His ship encountered storms, rough seas, and the constant threat of Spanish ships, which patrolled the waters to protect their own colonial interests. When White finally arrived in England, he found the country in the midst of a crisis. The Spanish Armada was preparing to invade, and all available ships were being commandeered for the war effort. White's pleas for help were met with delays and excuses, leaving him frustrated and powerless. The war with Spain dominated England's attention, and White's mission to rescue the Roanoke settlers was pushed to the sidelines. He spent months trying to secure ships and supplies, but his efforts were repeatedly thwarted by bureaucratic red tape and political infighting. The delay weighed heavily on White, who knew that every passing day brought the settlers closer to disaster. He could only hope that they would find a way to survive until he could return. White's letters and petitions to Queen Elizabeth I and other officials went largely unanswered. The fate of the Roanoke Colony seemed to matter little in the face of the looming war with Spain. White's frustration grew as he realized that his promises to the settlers might go unfulfilled. He had left behind his family and friends, trusting that he could secure the help they needed. But as the months turned into years, that trust began to waver. Governor John White's return to England was a fateful decision that would have far-reaching consequences. His inability to secure help for the Roanoke settlers left them stranded in a harsh and unforgiving land, surrounded by hostile tribes and dwindling resources. As we delve deeper into the mystery of the lost colony, we are left to wonder, what became of the settlers during White's absence? Their story is one of courage, resilience, and ultimately, tragedy, a mystery that continues to captivate and haunt us to this day. In 1588, England faced its greatest threat, the Spanish Armada, a massive fleet of warships sent by King Philip II to invade and conquer the country. The Armada's arrival marked a turning point in European history, but also had dire consequences for the Roanoke Colony. Governor John White's efforts to secure ships and supplies for settlers were repeatedly delayed as England mobilized its forces to defend against the Spanish invasion. The war with Spain would dominate England's attention for years, leaving the Roanoke settlers stranded and forgotten. The Spanish Armada was one of the largest naval forces ever assembled, with over 130 ships and 30,000 men. Its goal was to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I and restore Catholicism to England. The English Navy, led by Sir Francis Drake and Lord Howard of Effingham, prepared to meet the threat head-on. The resulting battle was a turning point in European history, as England's victory secured its status as a global power. But for the Roanoke settlers, the war was a disaster. All available ships were commandeered for the war effort, leaving White unable to secure the resources he needed to rescue the colony. White's letters and petitions to Queen Elizabeth I and other officials went largely unanswered. The fate of the Roanoke Colony seemed to matter little in the face of the looming war with Spain. White's frustration grew as he realized that his promises to the settlers might go unfulfilled. He had left behind his family and friends, trusting that he could secure the help they needed. But as the months turned into years, that trust began to waver. The war with Spain dragged on for years, and White's mission to rescue the Roanoke settlers was repeatedly delayed. By the time the conflict ended in 1604, it was too late. The settlers had been stranded for over a decade, and their fate remained a mystery. White's inability to secure help for the colony was a tragic consequence of the war, one that would forever alter the course of history. When White finally returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, he found the settlement abandoned. The only clue to the settlers' fate was the word Croatoan carved into a wooden post. The mystery of the lost colony had begun, and it would remain unsolved for centuries. The Spanish Armada had not only delayed White's rescue mission, but also sealed the fate of the Roanoke settlers, leaving behind one of history's greatest enigmas. The Spanish Armada's impact on the Roanoke colony was profound and far-reaching. It delayed Governor John White's rescue mission, leaving the settlers stranded and forgotten. As we delve deeper into the mystery of the lost colony, we are left to wonder, what became of the settlers during White's absence? Their story is one of courage, resilience, and ultimately, tragedy, a mystery that continues to captivate and haunt us to this day.